I drove all the way to my husband's office that morning thinking I'd surprise him with coffee. The building was glass and steel polished like a lie that hadn't cracked yet. At the entrance, a sign read, "Authorized personnel only." I smiled and told the guard I'm the CEO's wife. He laughed soft at first, then louder and said, "Ma'am, I see her wife every day. There she is coming out right now." I turned and there she was, young, confident, wearing my husband's world like a crown. I stood there holding 2 cups of coffee, realizing one of them had never been meant for me. That was the moment something inside me shattered quietly. But I didn't walk away. I decided to play along. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you are. I love hearing how far my story reached. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. If this story touches you, please subscribe to my channel. Every voice here reminds me I'm not alone in what I went through. My name is Vespera Locke, and this is how I found out my husband's success wasn't the only thing he was hiding. I drove to Oraline Dynamics that morning with 2 lattes and a paper bag of croissants, the kind Kellen loved when he was too busy to eat. The sun hit the glass tower like a mirror, cold, reflective, almost arrogant. I'd always admired that building from a distance, thinking of it as a symbol of my husband's success. That day I walked through its doors for the first time feeling proud, nervous, and maybe a little foolish for missing him so much. The lobby smelled of new marble and expensive air conditioning. A video wall streamed Oraline's corporate news headlines about quarterly growth and a woman named Sable Wynn, the CEO preparing for a board meeting. I smiled politely at the security desk. "Good morning. I'm here to see Kellen Rourke, the CEO. I just brought him breakfast." The guard, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, looked up from his monitor. His nameplate read, Thomas Alvarez. He hesitated. Then his face shifted something between amusement and discomfort. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "you said you're the CEO's wife." "Yes," I replied, straightening my blouse. "Kellen Rourke. He runs Oraline Dynamics." Thomas exhaled a sound halfway between a sigh and a laugh. "I see her wife every day," he said, nodding toward the glass doors. "There she is coming out right now." I turned. A tall woman in a navy suit was walking out with another woman by her side. Sable Wynn, the CEO, the name from the video wall. She was composed, sharp, elegant. The other woman, Daria Snow, walked beside her like a perfect reflection. Same rhythm, same confidence, a quiet intimacy in how they leaned toward each other. The whole lobby seemed to slow down as they passed. Their laughter echoed against the marble, and for a moment I felt like a ghost in a life I didn't recognize. I froze. My latte trembled in my hand. Thomas shifted uneasily. "Would you like to leave that here at the desk, ma'am? I can make sure it gets to, well, whoever it's for." His hesitation burned. I forced a smile. "No, it's fine. I'll just leave it. I'm a family friend." The words came out, smooth, automatic. I placed the coffee on the counter and backed away, slowly pretending I'd simply mistaken the time, but my pulse was screaming. As the doors closed behind Sable and Daria, I caught one last detail. Sable's access badge clipped to her blazer, marked CEO. My husband had never had one like that. I stepped outside the cool air, biting my face. I texted Kellen. "Hey, I was nearby. Tried to drop breakfast. Where are you?" His reply came instantly. "Just heading into a board meeting. Busy morning. Love you." I looked up at the building's mirrored windows. On the video wall inside the live stream now showed Sable leading that same board meeting. I checked the time, 8:58, then 9:01. The minutes moved, but my world didn't. I stood by my car, clutching the empty paper bag, and whispered to myself, "I'll give him 24 hours, and I'll verify every word he's ever said." The latte I'd brought for him sat untouched on the counter, still warm, just like the part of me that refused to believe the man I loved might not exist the way he said he did. By noon, the doubt had hardened into purpose. I'd spent years trusting Kellen's version of reality. Now I was ready to test it. Our home in Montecito was quiet, filled with all the things we'd built together, artifacts of a life that looked perfect on the surface. I opened the small safe in my study and pulled out the file of joint statements, receipts, and old contracts. My hands were steady the way they'd been back when I worked in forensic auditing, before I let his career eclipse mine. I laid everything out on the dining table and started sorting date, time, location: Bella Vista, the Lark, Langham, Pasadena, Los Olivos Spa. The transactions lined up neatly with the nights he'd said board dinner or late meeting with investors. The patterns were too clean. Kellen was an accountant's dream. No errors, no gaps, except one: the truth. I opened the family iPad he often used for email drafts. The device synced automatically to his calendar. There they were, recurring entries under a private alias: dinner every other Thursday, coffee with S, 8 a.m. Tuesdays, weekend planning twice a month. Eso. I whispered, feeling something cold slide through my chest. Sable Wynn. I called him just to hear his voice. The line clicked. Then music drifted through soft jazz clinking glasses. "Hey," he said cheerfully. "I'm in a Zoom meeting. Can I call you back?" I listened to the faint laugh of a woman in the background, the sound of a bottle opening. "Sure," I said. "Don't let me interrupt your board meeting." He didn't even notice the sarcasm. When the call ended, I opened a spreadsheet on my laptop, the kind I hadn't built in years. I labeled 4 columns: date, expense, Kellen's explanation, observations. Under observations, I typed small, deliberate notes: wine purchase, the Lark, Thursday, board meeting; Spa Los Olivos, Saturday, conference; Langham, Pasadena, overnight stay, Monday, investor meeting. I cross-referenced transaction times against GPS pings from our shared credit card app. The map dotted across Santa Barbara and up the coast like breadcrumbs, leading away from home. Then I found something that made me stop breathing. A new credit card account, secondary user, Kellen Rourke. Mailing address, Seacliff Residences, Goleta. That wasn't our address. Goleta was 30 minutes away, a gated complex for long-term corporate stays. I scrolled further: monthly utilities charged to that same card and one recurring payment: Harborview Storage Unit number 214. I sat back in my chair staring at the data that suddenly formed a map of deceit. Every entry told a story, and every story led to another woman's world: meetings that didn't exist, hotels that weren't business trips, addresses that weren't ours. By sunset, I couldn't stay still. I drove along Cabrillo Boulevard, windows down, salt air hitting my face. The ocean stretched to my right, endless and cruelly calm. I passed the Lark. A familiar car caught my eye. Black Mercedes with a vanity plate I recognized from Oraline's parking garage. Jet Carrington, the COO. Another player in Kellen's supposed world. My stomach turned. I parked by the water, opened the spreadsheet again, and saved it under a new name: Truth Audit V1. Then I placed my car keys on the map app, circling Seacliff Residences in red. Tomorrow I would go there. Tomorrow I would cross their authorized personnel only line. As the sky darkened over the Pacific, I whispered to no one, if he built a life I was never meant to see, I'll walk right into it. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I might find. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. By the next afternoon, my curiosity had hardened into resolve. The drive from Montecito to Goleta was short, but it felt like crossing into another life entirely. The closer I got to Seacliff Residences, the more it felt like the kind of place built to hide stories: tall hedges, mirrored glass, the hum of silence that money buys. I parked 2 blocks away and waited, my pulse keeping time with the ticking dashboard clock. At 5:10 p.m., I saw a man exit a black SUV carrying a dry cleaning bag draped in plastic. Jet Carrington. His reflection flickered in the lobby glass before the door shut behind him. 10 minutes later, I stepped out of the car with a small key I'd found in Kellen's drawer, a key I had once assumed opened his briefcase. The hallway smelled like fabric softener and someone else's life. I found 19B, slipped the key in, and the lock turned without resistance. Inside, everything was meticulously arranged. The air carried a faint trace of the cologne I had given Kellen years ago, the one he'd said was too strong for him. The irony cut deep. The living room was a study in controlled intimacy, clean lines, minimalist art, a bottle of Chardonnay half-finished on the counter. On the shelf, framed photographs, Kellen and Sable at a gala, both glowing under stage lights. In another, the two of them stood barefoot on a beach. I didn't recognize his arm around her waist, her hand resting lightly over his. No wedding ring. Their eyes met the camera like a silent confession. I moved through the apartment, quietly cataloging everything in my mind. His shirts hung beside her dresses, color-coordinated as if they'd built a life with matching hangers. 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom, 2 bathrobes. I felt the ache rise, then dissolve into a colder kind of clarity. The woman in those photos wasn't stealing my husband. She was sharing the version of him he'd wanted to become. On the glass desk sat a single folder labeled Future Transitions. Inside, charts, flow diagrams, a proposed new corporate structure for Oraline Dynamics. Sable remained CEO. Jet gained operational control. Kellen promoted to President External Relations, a title with prestige but no authority. A crown made of paper. At the bottom of the stack was a draft memo from Mendel and Ross, a law firm I recognized from years ago. The notes were strategic, clinical, and personal all at once. Frame Vespera as emotionally distant, unable to adapt to growth. Use narrative of misalignment in ambition. They had already begun rewriting who I was on paper. I took photos of every page metadata, timestamps, layouts. Then I noticed an open laptop on the desk. The screen glowed faintly, showing Kellen's synced calendar. Coffee with S, Tuesdays 8 a.m., weekend planning, bi-weekly. I snapped a shot, each image a tiny nail in the coffin of our marriage. As I opened the bottom drawer, my hand brushed against a sealed envelope marked Board Proposal. Draft, strictly confidential. Inside were slides titled Strategic Reorganization for 2025. Each page bore the Oraline logo and Sable's initials, yet none of them were logged in the official minutes of the last board meeting, an irregularity any auditor would spot immediately. This wasn't ambition. It was manipulation dressed in corporate language. They were planning to bypass formal approval, quietly installing Kellen as a public-facing figure while concealing their personal relationship. The evidence was a perfect storm of betrayal and governance fraud bound by paper clips and false signatures. I kept taking pictures until my phone storage warned me it was full. Before leaving, I checked one last folder tucked behind the monitor. A receipt from Los Olivos private tasting, the same date Kellen had claimed to be at an off-site strategy meeting. I photographed that too. Standing in the doorway, I looked back once at the apartment, the stillness, the pretense of order, the kind of silence people build when they think no one will ever catch them. I whispered to the empty room, "You call this future transitions. I call it evidence." I locked the door and walked away, my reflection fading in the glass like a ghost, leaving the house of her own betrayal. By the time I reached the parking lot, the sun had turned the sky to copper. I opened my phone, scrolled through the photos, and said quietly to myself, "They built a plan for the future. I'll write the record of their past." Then I drove home, ready to confront the man who had turned ambition into deceit. The next morning, the house in Montecito was unusually still. The fog clung to the windows, soft and cold. I laid the printed copies of every photo receipt and document from the Goleta apartment across the kitchen table, my own kind of boardroom. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound when Kellen walked in. He was in his robe, scrolling his phone, casual as ever. "You're up early," he said, reaching for the coffee pot. I didn't look at him. You forgot to lock your apartment at Seacliff Residences, I said evenly. The words hung in the air like a flare. He froze. The phone slipped slightly in his hand before he recovered, forcing a chuckle. What apartment? I gestured to the papers. The one where your shirts live beside Sable Wynn's dresses. The one with your gala photos and a folder called Future Transitions. His face shifted through denial irritation calculation. He set his mug down. You went through my things, I went through my marriage, I replied. Your things just happened to be there. He sank into the chair opposite me, eyes darting across the papers. You don't understand, Vess. It's not what you think. Then help me, I said. Explain why a law firm drafted a divorce strategy for you, or why Mendel and Ross described me as a woman misaligned with her husband's ambition. Explain why my name is part of a corporate restructuring I never agreed to. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his forehead. You've always been too comfortable. You never wanted more. Sable does. She sees potential in you I cut in, or in what you can make her look like. The tension thickened until even the air felt fragile. He leaned forward. You have no idea how this world works. These titles, these partnerships, they're all about perception. You think you can just walk in with your spreadsheets and tear it apart? I picked up the small recorder from the counter and pressed the button. A soft red light blinked. Say that again, I said. He stared at me, realizing what I'd done. You're recording this just for accuracy. You know, so the narrative doesn't get misaligned again. He stood abruptly pacing the kitchen. Everything's already in motion. The board review is next week. If you cause a scene now, you'll ruin everything for both of us. Everything for you, I corrected. For me, it's already ruined. He turned, face tightening. Sable's giving me an official title, President of External Relations. It's a symbolic move. You can't imagine what that means for our future. Symbolic, I repeated, almost laughing. You're not a CEO Kellen, you're her spokesperson, a public ornament with a business card you printed yourself. His silence confirmed it. I looked at him for a long moment, memorizing the man who had replaced truth with performance. You told me you lied because I liked feeling proud, but I think you lied because you liked being admired. He swallowed, jaw tightening. You wouldn't understand what it's like to want more. I do, I said. I just learned to earn it without selling anyone a lie. He looked down, defeated but defiant, muttering, Just don't make noise about this, Vess. It's handled. Don't embarrass yourself. That sentence landed heavier than any confession. Handled, I echoed. You mean silenced. I saved the recording and emailed it to myself before he could touch my phone. He didn't notice he was already retreating upstairs, muttering something about damage control. When the door shut, I sat there surrounded by papers, the house smelling of burnt coffee and dishonesty. For a moment I wanted to cry, but instead I opened my laptop. I searched my contacts until I found a name I hadn't spoken in years. Clara Mendel, a brilliant forensic attorney I'd studied with someone who once said, "Numbers don't lie, but people do." I began typing an email, Clara. I need someone who understands both the math and the motives of men. Are you still in practice? The cursor blinked like a heartbeat at the end of the message. I hit send, then looked at the kitchen. Our kitchen now turned into an evidence room. The latte machine hissed softly, filling the silence. I whispered to the empty air. If he built his empire on perception, I'll rebuild the truth on proof. And for the first time in weeks, I felt steady, not because I had found answers, but because I finally knew where to start. The Monday sun over Santa Barbara was too bright for the kind of war I was about to start. I parked in front of the Mendel and Ross building, the same name that had once appeared in the divorce draft I'd found in the Goleta apartment. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now I was walking through those glass doors, not as a defendant in their plan, but as someone about to rewrite it. Clara Mendel hadn't changed much since the last time I saw her. Calm, composed, the kind of woman who could dismantle a lie with a pencil stroke. She gestured toward the seat across from her desk. "You look like you've been carrying truth too heavy for too long," she said. "I'm not sure what I'm carrying," I replied, placing the folder and USB drive on her desk. "But it's enough to break something." For the next hour, I laid it all out. The photos from apartment 19B, the invoices, the draft proposal, the recorded conversation with Kellen. She listened in silence, occasionally underlining something on her notepad, her eyes narrowing with each new detail. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "They're building a case to make you look obsolete," she said matter-of-factly, "but they left fingerprints all over the paperwork. They called me withdrawn," I said softly. "Someone who doesn't align with her husband's ambition." "That line will be useful," Clara said, tapping her pen. "Will show that while they were writing stories about your weakness, they were also funneling joint assets into unauthorized accounts." I looked at her. "If this spills into the company, it already has," she interrupted. "You have evidence of governance breaches. Once we report this to the board, it stops being a marital dispute. It becomes corporate misconduct." She handed me a flash drive. "Back up everything." Twice. "Send one copy to me, keep another somewhere off-site." By noon, I had renamed the master file. Timeline of financial misconduct. Each entry was time-stamped, cross-referenced, and color-coded the language I spoke best. Clara filed a temporary asset freeze that afternoon. At her suggestion, I drafted an anonymous email to the board chairman, Richard Hale. The message was short: clinical evidence of procedural violations regarding proposed corporate restructuring. Board proposal. Draft submitted outside of official channels. Attach supporting documents. I hesitated before hitting send. Then I remembered Kellen's words. "Don't embarrass yourself." I pressed send and smiled. 15 minutes later, an auto reply blinked back. "Chairman currently in Los Angeles for emergency meeting on corporate restructuring proposed by CEO Wynn." The timing was surgical. They were discussing the very plan I had just exposed. At 7:03 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, expecting silence. Instead, a steady male voice said, "I don't need to know who you are, but if what you've sent is true, I'll require verifiable evidence within 48 hours. Then check your courier tomorrow morning," I said, heart pounding. That night, I drove the flash drive to a private courier station downtown, sealed it in a padded envelope marked confidential. Governance review. My hands didn't shake. For the first time in years, I wasn't scared of consequences. I was scared of silence. When I got home, the house lights were dim. Kellen was already there, waiting in the kitchen. He smiled faintly, like someone trying to practice sincerity. "You've been busy," he said. "Apparently, so have you." He poured himself a drink. "There's been some confusion at work. Did you talk to anyone?" I met his eyes. "You always say I'm not ambitious enough, Kellen. Maybe I'm finally catching up." He leaned against the counter, the faintest tremor in his jaw. "Someone's been contacting the board anonymously. They think it's a competitor trying to sabotage the restructuring." "How terrible," I said quietly. "You must feel so exposed." His smile faltered, the performance slipping. "If you're angry, fine. Just don't make a scene. You'll ruin everything." "Maybe everything needed to be ruined," I said, walking past him. In my room, I opened my laptop. A new email flashed at the top of my inbox: internal audit review. Urgent meeting tomorrow. Outside, the wind from the Pacific rattled the window panes. I looked at my reflection in the glass and murmured, "Finally." I don't need their permission to enter the building. The first headline appeared 3 days later. Oralane Dynamics under governance review, questions raised over CEO's conduct. By then, I'd already received an anonymous email from someone inside the company. "Thank you." They've started asking the right questions. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My evidence was moving on its own, flowing through the system like a slow, unstoppable current. News reports multiplied. Sable Wynn appeared on TV, poised and cold, insisting her leadership was unquestionable. The camera didn't show the tremor in her voice. Daria Snow, her wife, filed for legal separation the same day. Photos of her leaving their estate with a single suitcase made the front page of the local paper. Kellen tried to call me twice, then stopped. A week later, Orleans' HR department suspended his access badge and company phone. The board called it a standard precaution. It wasn't. It was exile. Clara kept me updated from her office downtown. "The investigation's widening," she said over the phone. "They found that the Goleta apartment's rent was paid through the company's PR fund. They labeled it client hospitality." I sat by the window pen in hand, adding the note to my growing file. So their private retreat was billed as outreach. That's neat accounting. Sloppy, actually, Clara corrected, and easy to prove. For days, I stayed quiet, documenting everything, like a scientist watching a controlled explosion. The news cycle turned ruthless. Commentators debated whether Sable's leadership could survive. The same video wall that had once shown her power now replayed her downfall, frame by frame. Then late one night, my phone rang again. Unknown number, familiar voice. "You've destroyed my career," Sable hissed. "All because you couldn't stand to lose him. You think this makes you righteous?" I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. "You did that yourself. I just opened the door you locked behind lies." She hung up without another word. The next morning, I received an email from Orleans' legal department. "We request your participation as a witness in the internal review. Your cooperation will help ensure the integrity of our findings." I read it twice, then forwarded it to Clara. "They're calling me in," I said. "Good," she replied. "Now they know you're not noise, you're evidence." The investigation unfolded like clockwork. Internal memos leaked. The board proposal, draft I had uncovered, was verified as unauthorized. Richard Hale assumed temporary control pending Sable's formal removal. Her resignation statement was vague and sterile, citing personal matters. Meanwhile, journalists speculated about the unnamed insider who had triggered the review. They called her the ghost in the data. I almost smiled. By the end of that week, Daria's lawyers filed a joint petition citing irreconcilable breaches of trust. The symmetry of it all struck me: two women, betrayed by the same illusion of power, each reclaiming her voice in silence. At home, I kept my routine simple. Coffee at 6, notes at 8, emails at 10. But at night, when the house went still, I'd catch my reflection in the glass and think about that first morning in the lobby, the sign that read, "Authorized personnel only." Back then, it had felt like a wall. Now it looked more like glass, something that only needed pressure and time to crack. A week later, Clara sent me a message. "Be ready for negotiations. They'll come to you before it reaches court." That night, as I watched the city lights flicker over the ocean, a news alert appeared on my phone. Oraline board calls, emergency meeting to consider CEO dismissal. I set the phone down, folded my hands, and whispered, "Glass doesn't shatter in one blow. It fractures quietly from within." The reflection on my window blurred into the dark, half my face, half the world I'd just dismantled. For the first time in months, I felt peace in the noise. The kind that comes not from revenge, but from truth, finally speaking louder than the lies. The conference room at Mendel and Ross felt colder than the morning outside. Glass walls, gray sky, a table that looked long enough to stage a war. I sat at one end with Clara. Across from us, Kellen adjusted his cuff like it could hold his life together. The firm's recorder clicked on. A court reporter looked bored. 2 associates pretended not to stare. On the wall, a screen waited for Richard Hale to join by video. When the timer on the speakerphone hit 10:30, Kellen cleared his throat. "I just want an amicable resolution," he said. "Let's divide this the reasonable way, 70-30. I'll keep the Montecito house. I'll make sure she's provided for." Clara didn't look at him. "Vespera, open your file." I turned my laptop, mirrored the screen, and scrolled. 24 months of ledgers lit the glass table, every dinner, hotel, rideshare, boutique, charge, and tasting room receipt, mapped against a calendar he once called board work. Line by line, I narrated the numbers. Joint account withdrawal same day as Goleta rent. PR fund reimbursement coded as client hospitality, which paid for a private apartment address. I enlarged the cell highlighted in red. 2 nights at Langham, Pasadena. You told me it was an investor dinner. Your GPS put you there at 1:17 a.m. Kellen shifted. These are taken out of context. Clara set a second folder on the table, the printout of our kitchen recording with timestamps. His line floated black on white. Everything's already in motion. The board review is next week. Don't make noise. The room didn't move. Orleans counsel tried to wedge in air. Corporate policies aren't material here. Internal company matters should be separated from the dissolution proceedings. I kept my voice level. When marital assets fund a second life and that second life is shielded by bogus corporate coding, it belongs in this room. The screen flickered. Richard Hale appeared in a small window, glasses reflecting the same colorless light in our room. "I'll be brief," he said. "Ms. Wynne resigned this morning. The future transitions packet has been confirmed as fabricated from unapproved drafts. The company will not indemnify Mr. Rourke. We will cooperate with any lawful request for records." Kellen went very still. His hand, so careful a minute ago, shook. He tried to smile as if a camera was on. "Richard, that's not the line cut. Hale had already signed off. The silence afterward had weight." Clara slid a single page across the table. "Bank transfer history. From Ms. Wynne's personal account to Mr. Rourke. Labeled personal consulting. No contract on file, no board disclosure recurring over 8 months." She tapped the total. "This isn't advice. It's a private stipend." Orleans counsel looked down. "We have no position on that." Kellen stared at me with something like pleading, then turned it to anger because that was easier to wear. "If you hadn't gone digging, none of this would have exploded. You could have kept your life." "Which life?" I asked. "The real one, or the one you rehearsed for me?" Clara leaned in. "Our demand is straightforward. Equal division of remaining assets. Montecito goes to my client, and he reimburses all misused marital funds, every dollar that propped up the other arrangement." I felt her waiting for my cue to press harder to turn the knife for maximum leverage. I shook my head. "I'm not here to win. I'm here to write it down correctly." I looked at Kellen. "You repay what you spent that wasn't ours to spend. Then we go our separate ways." He slammed his palm against the table veneer, snapping like a brittle truth. "If you hadn't pried, no one would have known a thing." The court reporter glanced up. The keys on her steno machine rattled faster. Clara didn't smile, but I saw the tiniest breath of satisfaction cross her face. We broke for 15 minutes so the attorneys could draft the memorandum. Outside the glass, the sky had gone a flatter shade of steel. When we reconvened, the language was simple. I kept the house and half of what remained. He assumed full repayment of all non-marital expenditures with a schedule attached and an audit clause. Orleans counsel read their own statement into the record a governance breach occurred. The company has terminated related relationships and will implement new disclosure controls. When the recorder clicked off, I gathered my laptop and the file of copies, the same papers that had changed rooms and meanings over the last month. Reporters waited in the hallway, a tangle of microphones and pointed questions. "Ms. Locke, do you feel like you won?" one asked. "I didn't win," I said. "I just took back what was mine, the truth." The camera lights washed my face in that cold fluorescent blue I now recognized from boardrooms and lobbies, and the day assigned told me I wasn't allowed to know what was real. I walked past them and didn't look back. 6 months later, the ocean looked like a fresh sheet of steel, the sun riding silver along its spine. I had traded a vast kitchen table for a smaller desk in a smaller apartment, 3 blocks from Butterfly Beach. On it lay the first 4 files of my new practice, Locke Forensic Consulting Small Businesses, that wanted a second pair of eyes on the books, a clean pulse check on their principles. The hum of my own printer felt better than the hush of any marble lobby. Clara stopped by with 2 paper cups and a folded newspaper. "It's done," she said. Orlean named a new chief executive. The internal review is closed. They've published a formal policy on conflicts and unauthorized drafts. I slid her a coaster. She never used coasters, but I offered anyway. Took them long enough, I said, smiling, but learning is learning. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I knew too well. I'm sorry, I lost everything. I stared until the screen dimmed, then deleted it without replying. Some things don't need an audit. The mailbox held an envelope without a return address. Inside was an old photo, Sable Kellen and me at a fundraiser years ago, all surface brightness and practiced angles. On the back in Daria's hand, maybe we were all deceived by the same person. I let the sentence sit in my chest and felt the small ache of recognition. We hadn't been on the same side, but we had been on the same battlefield without knowing it. That afternoon, Clara forwarded a slide from an internal Oraline training deck approved by Richard Hale. A single quote filled the screen attributed to me from the deposition, "Transparency isn't a badge. It's an obligation." I laughed, then surprised myself by crying a little quietly in the way you do when a bruise finally stops hurting and you realize how long you've been bracing against it. Near sunset, I walked down to the sand with a thin notebook I'd started calling a forensic journal. A habit returned to me like a steady tide. I wrote one line and underlined it twice. The last fact in any case isn't a number, it's a person. Once the light reaches them, their wounds stop steering the story. I closed the notebook and listened to the soft pull of the water as it drew its long, shining mark across the beach. On the balcony that night, the breeze smelled of salt and jasmine. I thought about the sign in the lobby that once told me knowledge was for other people. I thought about Scotch glasses and stage titles and the way a single folder can change an entire life. I thought about the women who texted apologies and the women who sent photographs and the one looking back at me in the window who finally believed herself. The legal work ended weeks ago. The marriage ended months ago. The part of me that believed love could survive on silence ended the day I watched two women walk out of a building like they owned the world and realized one of them was using my house to decorate it. What remained was something plain and generous, a life measured honestly. Coffee I liked. Cases I chose. A shoreline I could find with my eyes closed. Before I went in, I whispered the last line I owed that old sign, "You don't get to tell me where truth lives anymore." Then I clicked off the porch light and let the ocean keep its rhythm. Somewhere behind me on a desk, I'd paid for myself a business card, waited in a neat stack, my name a number, and a promise I intended to keep.